Hey guys, here's your discussion review for today. Great job on your research projects. Led to some really good discussion. You guys did really well. Again, I felt like we ran out of time, like always. Um, but here we go. The first one was Nick with his research on the Mayan calendar. It was interesting how he found that it wasn't actually originally Mayan, but it was used by many Central American cultures around the area, even before the Mayans, and how it's not one calendar, but it's actually three interlacing calendars, divine calendars, and then a civil calendar, the long count, the Tzolk'in, and the Hab. So that led me on my own research after we talked, and I did a little bit more digging on why there's three different count or calendars and what does each one signify. So thanks to you, here's what I found. So the Tzolk'in is a 260-day count. So I guess the difference is the different lengths of each of those calendars or counts. The Hab is a 365-day count, which coincides with a solar year, and then the long count is a count of days since a mythological starting point. So that's obviously the more interesting one that led to that December 21, 2012 discussion. Found interesting too that there's the calendar round is a synchronized cycle that lasts for 52 Habs, so 52 years. So kind of close to the biblical Jubilee, which is 50-year time period, but it's off by 2 years with 52, which is interesting. We talked about December 21, 2012. So, all right, the long count. So the mythological starting point, you're right, Nick, it goes back to August 11, 3114 BC is the mythological start point of that long count. And apparently there's these cycles called Baktun or Baktun that happens every 395 years. So the last cycle ended, supposedly December 21st, 2012. And so a new Baktun cycle started on that day. Found that interesting that it is now the 13th cycle. That number 13, I'm not kidding you, I'm not planning it, but that number 13 keeps coming up in our discussion. Um, Obviously, we talked about its association with the cult and stuff like that. So, coincidence? Again, too many coincidences, right, that we've been talking about. But yeah, we are now in the 13th Baktun cycle. So, maybe it's the last Baktun cycle. I don't know. We'll see. But going back to that December 21st, 2012 date, I share with you the theory of how it might be 2 years off. Now, the Mayan calendar is known to be extremely accurate, as Nick told us, and found it cool how you can date certain events. Nick mentioned how certain like volcanic eruptions and events that happen in history were marked in that calendar. Not that they were predicted, but they were marked so we can accurately date when the specific dates of certain events were. And it was believed that the universe would reset at at some point with this Mayan calendar. But, I thought it ended December 21st, 2012. I thought that was the belief on it, but I guess it's not. It's just the end of that cycle, but the start of a new cycle. And Nick mentioned how there's a 5,125 year cycle as well, which is how long this thing has been around up to December 21st, 2012. But my theory on could it be 2 years off? And, I based that off of nothing happened December 21st, 2012. However, 2 years prior, on December 1st, 2010, there were some events that happened that, that I shared with you. Now, Nick had a great point, going back to scripture, no one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels nor the Son, but only the Father, on when the end times events are going to start occurring. So I don't think the Mayan calendar, the popular belief back then in 2012 was the world was going to end. This was the last year. There was going to be cataclysmic events. This was it, you know. Obviously, the world did not end in 2012. So I don't think this calendar was counting down to the return of Christ or anything like that, because like Nick pointed out, nobody knows the hour. But could it have been counting down to something else? You know, we don't know when the Lord will come back. No human-made calendars can predict that. It's a spiritual timing. It's a God calendar thing. That's a whole other study. But of course, we must trust God above all. So, yeah, I don't think this Mayan calendar has anything to do with the return of Christ. But what does it, you know, what is the deal with it? What is it pointing to? So I mentioned how, you know, it goes back to Itzamna, which in Plato's Critias, he was one of the pairs of twins that Poseidon had with Cleito, the daughter of Evenor, the Atlantean. So this character, Itzamna, who the Mayans or the Central American, you know, kind of cultures back then got the Mayan calendar from, goes back to the myth about Atlantis, which is kind of interesting. It makes you wonder, you know, was there truth to that myth of Atlantis? Many believe yes, there was. What I also, you know, found interesting, not only was this guy supposedly a king, one of the kings of Atlantis, the ninth one, and he also founded the Mayan city of Chichen. So he, I guess, migrated from Atlantis, wherever that was, and founded a city in Chichen. Maybe if it's a true story, maybe after Atlantis flooded, he got out of there and ended up in the Mayan area. And he became a national god of the Mayans. Now, it says that he was a giant, which, of course, when I see giant or hear a giant, it triggers in my mind Nephilim, as we have been talking about. Just like the number 13, Nephilim also keep coming up as we discuss things with end times. So maybe something there. As I researched this guy, I found some more stuff too. One, he was an idol. There's on the top picture there, you see little idols of Itzamna. Itzamna was worshipped, so he was definitely an object of idol worship. And for some reason, in our Library of Congress, in the John Adams building, we decided to put a whole placard to this guy in there. Again, like things that just make me wonder, like why do we do this in our, you know, in our own capital? Why do we have a placard in the John Adams Building, Library of Congress, to Itzamna, a supposed giant who was king of Atlantis that migrated to Central America and gave a what would seem to be a pagan calendar to the cultures there. I don't know. Going back to the dating of this calendar and when you know, the long count started, like we mentioned, it could be dated all the way back to August 11, 3114 BC. Now, I mentioned briefly, I've done studies on the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 12 and like mapping out the timeline from the creation, you know, through the flood all the way to Abraham. So with those calculations, that would put this calendar pre-flood. It would put it before the flood of Noah, about 900 years after creation, you know, which means Adam would have still been around because he died in 930 years old. And that would put it 750 years before the flood. Now, that's a whole other discussion on the timing of it. We didn't get too deep into it. It was just mentioned. But that's a whole other study that if you ever have the time or motivation, I recommend you do on just mapping the age of the Earth and how we're almost at about 6,000 years right now. That's another cool rabbit hole to dive down. But anyways, back to this Itzamna character. The idol worshipping led me to one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Book of Jasher, mentioning that in the pre-flood context, there was idol worshipping happening. So this is before the flood, chapter 2 in the Book of Jasher. It says that men were starting to worship images of brass and iron, wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. So there was idolatry, it would seem, according to this Dead Sea Scroll, prior to the flood. And it caused people to kind of forget about the Lord. So with this Itzamna character and the Mayan calendar being dated before the flood and the little idols of Itzamna found, yeah, could there have been idol worship prior to the flood? And not only did it cause people to forget about the Lord, it angered the Lord. It says in the Book of Jasher there that the Lord then caused the waters of the river Gihon to overwhelm them. So this is a flood prior to the flood. As Maddie mentioned, there was no rain prior to the flood. So what caused this flood? Well, it tells us right there the Gihon River overflowed and destroyed a third of the earth. So a third of the earth was flooded prior to the big flood, according to the Book of Jasher. So, was the Atlantis story real? Is there credit to it? Was there some advanced civilization that was involved in idol worshiping and caused the Lord to, to flood it as a judgment to it? Possibly. I'm starting to believe so. We're going to have to look more into that Atlantis story. And if that's the case, did this guy in Samna flee from the flooding and ended up in Central America and had this calendar, and that the Mayans adopted it, which means it's not even really a Mayan calendar. It would be an Atlantis calendar. And what is it pointing to? What do the cycles point to in the future? So kind of a cool discussion that we had there on that. Now, my theory on it being 2 years off. Initially, it was because nothing happened in 2012. Everybody was waiting for this big event and nothing happened. However, exactly 2 years prior, on December 21, 2010, there was a lot of stuff that happened that I shared with you. And now when I looked up at the Hab being 52 years as opposed to the biblical 50-year Jubilee, that being 2 years off, that adds a little bit more credence to it. So I don't know, maybe the calendar was actually pointing to December 21st, 2010. I mentioned how we got Jesus' birth off by about 2 years. It's believed now that Jesus was born in, either 2 or 3 BC, not at the year 1 BC, year 1, the same, according to our calendar, but we're off by 2 years on that. So we're off our 2 years on Jesus' birth. Could we be off on 2 years on this Mayan calendar backton cycle? And if that's so, then that would put it to December 21st, 2010, as opposed to 2012. Now, that makes it interesting because there was events that happened on December 21st, 2010. Nobody really was looking for it because everybody was looking for it in 2012, but everybody kind of missed it in 2010 because it kind of happened, at least in America, in the middle of the night. But that night there was earthquakes recorded all over the world by seismograph. There's a list of all of them, almost 300 earthquakes total in different locations. The strongest one being a 7.4 magnitude in Tokyo, Japan. I put 12 years ago, it's actually 13 years ago, I guess, because we're in 2023. But it was on Tuesday, December 21st, 2010, when that massive earthquake happened in Tokyo. And then there was all these other earthquakes all throughout the world. 128 of them were below magnitude 2.0. So those are earthquakes that, like I mentioned, you don't even feel them. You don't normally feel it. So if there's a magnitude 2 earthquake right here, we won't even feel the shaking. But the only way you know it happened is by the seismograph capturing it in their meters. So this was captured December 21st, 2010, all these earthquakes around the world. There was also a blood red moon that night. The lunar eclipse happened between 2:40 and 3:53 East Coast time, with the max eclipse blood red happening at 3:16. For like about a 10-minute period over East Coast. This is a picture taken in Washington, D.C. of the blood red moon. You know, there's the Washington Monument that we talked about last week. But what was also interesting about that blood red moon on December 21st, 2010 was that around 3 or so in the morning, it floated around above the Orion constellation. I don't remember seeing this. I wasn't looking up at 3 in the morning on December 21, 2010. But I found some good research online on it. Rob Skiba, I've mentioned him before if you want to look that up. But he was able to correlate how that blood red moon was over Orion, which I always wondered about Orion because, you know, he's the great hunter. You could clearly see his belt, his bow, his hands, but he doesn't have a head. He is a headless hunter. He goes back to Greek mythology. That apparently Orion was a great giant. So he wasn't just a hunter, but he was a giant hunter. Again, there's Nephilim in our own sky. And it made me think about our discussion about Nimrod and how proverbially in Genesis 10 it says he was known as a great hunter. So could Orion be another name for Nimrod, the man of many names? And why was the blood red moon on December 21st, 2010 floating over his head like if it was a decapitated head being held up by his hand, blood red? Interesting, it says the beast, I don't think we've talked about it yet because I think that's chapter 13, but the beast had a head wound that was healed. We did talk about how the beast is going to come back as well. Another interesting thing as well is that this appeared over DC at about 3:22 a.m. Made me think about our discussion last week of Skull and Bones and their weird secret number of 322. Could it have been reference to 3:22 a.m. on the end of the 12th Bacton cycle on the Mayan calendar? There will be a skull over the bones of Orion. Oh, and by the way, it's a blood red lunar eclipse. I mean, coincidence? Too many stuff there, just connecting at the same moment. And then the Earth responds with earthquakes all over. What happened on that night when that blood red moon appeared over the east coast of the United States? Another thing that did happen that day prior to that blood red moon, that afternoon, is Iraq Parliament approved their new government. You can see the date there, December 21st, 2010 at about 3 p.m. Eastern. So about 12 hours prior to the lunar eclipse and the massive earthquakes and the moon floating over Orion's head, his skull and bones at 3:22. About 12 hours prior to that, on the other side of the world, Iraq became a new government, a new freed government. So interesting. There's their new symbols. That funny, it's an eagle. How many stripes are under that eagle? I didn't count that before. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not 13, is it? 9, nope, 10 or 11. All right. It's just 10, and then you got the other 3 under the shield, which would equal 13. So maybe something there. Looks a lot like our eagle, or maybe a phoenix, which would tie it to the obelisk. And then that little star-like symbol left of it as well kind of matched the core of CERN, which we'll get to here in a couple slides. But another interesting thing that happened the following month in January 2011 is a 13th zodiac. 13th constellation was added to the zodiac. There's the number 13 again. Keeps coming up. And this one was called the Serpent Bearer, Ophiuchus. Okay, accepted in 2011 as the 13th zodiac, right after we had a blood red moon over Orion at 3:22 East Coast, followed by earthquakes all around the world and a new Babylon government. Interesting. Okay, switching to CERN. So Esther did some research on CERN. I asked Esther to research CERN because I had, one, I always wonder what the heck they were doing there. But two, I saw their symbol, which looks a lot like the number 666. So I figured, oh, maybe there's something there. So she did some good research on it. It's a European organization. They do nuclear research. It's on the border of France and Switzerland. 23 member states participate in it. So it's not just a France or Switzerland thing, but it's kind of this cohesive thing. And their focus, apparently, it's on particle physics and all that stuff. We didn't get into the AI technology too much. AI is an interesting topic too. If one of you guys want to research that for next week, that might be a good one to talk about. But Nick had some pretty good insights on just the whole particle physics things and how, I think he was saying, you collide particles and it forms new particles and all that stuff. And I did see they were trying to recreate the Big Bang, which doesn't sound like a smart idea to me. Why would you want to create the Big Bang on Earth? If that even is a thing. Sounds catastrophic to me. Esther also mentioned, that it kind of does look like a big old portal too, sitting underground between France and Switzerland. Maybe, could be, if they're trying to collide particles, maybe they're trying to open a portal to the underworld. Who knows? There's the symbol that kind of attracted me to it. You could see it looks like 3 6s kind of swirling around each other in different ways. Sure, could it be 3 9s? Sure. They also look like 3 6s. But Esther also found another interesting thing in her research, that India gifted this research lab a statue of the Indian god Shiva the Destroyer, which was interesting because CERN is very big about, it's in the name of science. There's no religious connection to it. This is all purely science. However, Shiva the Destroyer, the statue is right there on premise as a big old idol where CERN is located. This giant particle accelerator, like Esther said, and I agree, it looks like a portal if you look at it. I found a picture of it, so this is a slide we didn't cover today, but I did a little bit more research on CERN. If you look at the bottom left picture, it shows kind of a drawing of how big and wide this thing is. This circular, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, particle accelerator. The picture on the right there with the guy on the moped, you see to his side there's that big tube. That tube is what goes around that big circle underground. And I mentioned like the core of it on the top left there. I looked at like kind of what is their mission statement? What are they doing, trying to accomplish there? Of course, it's under the name of science and research. They state they're trying to find answers to the questions about the universe in the name of science. So no God of the Bible, none of that, right? However, Shiva the Destroyer is okay, right? But not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or our Lord Christ. They're trying to advance the frontiers of technology, they claim, trying to bring nations together through science. Interesting. That goes back to Babylon and the New World Order, trying to use science as a conduit to bring that about. And, apparently it's a thing of education, right? They're training the scientists of tomorrow. Great. Good for them. And then that card, sure does look a lot like the new Iraq/Babylon symbol from 2010. I don't know, probably coincidence again, right? A lot of coincidences. And then here's a picture of that, what I'm going to call an idol, on premise there in where this science facility is. There's this huge statue of Shiva, the Destroyer, representing the universe and the rhythm of birth and rebirth of the universe, this dance, all poetic nonsense, about this continuous creation and destruction and positive and negative charges. And, you could read on there, the idol kind of stands balanced as a symbol of, the the balancing of the universe. And the last part there I found interesting too, how has mention of our DNA. And that's why it's kind of in a straight line in the spiral. So why is that abomination on the side of a place in the name of science trying to find out the meaning of the universe with no creator and, talking about life and rebirth and all that? Maybe it is a portal to bring back some soul from the underworld and have them rebirth, Anyways, there you go, CERN. Okay, then we got talking about cloning. So interesting, we finished with DNA and then we get into Zachary's research on cloning. This took up, actually, most of our discussion was on this topic. Was my favorite one that we discussed today. I think it was really interesting. I learned a lot from you guys just on, what exactly is cloning, how it's, it's not so much, it's not like in vitro fertilization, I guess is what you guys kind of, brought up, where you're taking, this and this and you're mixing it and you're making, but it's more of like almost like a copy, taking DNA and copying it. We talked about the process of it, right? We talked about how Dottie the sheep, was successfully cloned back in the 90s. So that was a while ago, a couple of decades ago. So they were able to do that back then. What are they able to do now? What are the current experiments that are happening now? Then we kind of talked about like the actual process, how it actually works, and how, Nick kept making the point, which, I agree with him. Like, you don't just clone a full adult, right? It's got to be a baby and grow and all that. So definitely I need to do more research on cloning. I'm not an expert on it, but it's a topic that I kind of want to learn more about now because, one, I want to learn from you guys today. And, it makes me wonder when we're talking about in Revelation 17 and the bringing back of the beast of, he was a king who once was, but it's not now, but it's coming. But it, kind of a counterfeit resurrection. Sounds like that people are going to be amazed at the reappearance of this beast who had died. Can cloning be the source? Can the reappearance of this beast, Antichrist, can he be a clone in the future? Can they clone him? Did they clone him already? Who knows, right? I mean, obviously, if they're cloning the Antichrist, they're not going to come out and say it until they can reveal him and amaze the world. Who knows? Maybe he was cloned on December 21st, 2010. Maybe that's what the Mayan calendar was pointing to. And the world literally shook in response, which, let's see, according to Nick's theory, if he was, all right, let's just say it was cloned in 2010 and he had to be born, that would make him, about 13 years right now? 13 years old? So do we have a teenage clone Antichrist out there somewhere, that will be revealed later on when he's an adult? I don't know, maybe. All right, in addition to cloning, we also talked about hybridization, the Liger, how they successfully mixed, tigers and lions. What was interesting about the Liger, though, is that thing doesn't stop growing. So in the mixing of the genes between the tiger and the lion, one gene did not transfer, and that was the growth inhibitor protein. I think it's the FGR2 in the FGR2 gene. Again, I need to get more spun up on genealogy or gene studies, but apparently there's a protein that tells your body to stop growing at a certain age. So it happens with us, right? At a certain age, I stopped growing a lot earlier, so I'm so short. But at a certain age, we just stop growing. Well, these Ligers lack that protein in the hybridization transfer. So they just don't stop growing. They're still growing even to this day, which has caused a big problem because the bigger they get, the more they need to eat. It's just a matter of time before these modern day dinosaurs, kind of turn and start devouring people. Made me think too about the story of the Nephilim and the giants before the flood. Makes sense. If the Nephilim were hybrids of angel and human, could they have also been lacking that protein that tell them to stop growing? So when they reach, teenage age, whatever, when they were supposed to stop growing, they didn't. They kept growing, and that's how they became those massive giants that you see in the Book of Enoch, and that Genesis chapter 6 refers to, the Nephilim, and even their genetic line that goes past the flood into the Book of Numbers, and even to Goliath and all that, and the giants in the land of Canaan. Makes sense, right? Hybridization. Does hybridization stop growth? Or back that up. Does hybridization stop the growth inhibitor? So when you make hybrids, they just don't stop growing and become these huge, whatever, monsters. I mentioned how I found how this guy, Spanish scientist, my goodness, Juan Carlos Espesua Belmonte, is kind of experimenting with this. He's one of the doctors or scientists experimenting with this idea of hybridization. And he created the first human-monkey chimera embryos in China, of course. This was, I want to say, about a decade or so ago. I don't know the exact year. But yeah, there was a human monkey embryo created. Don't know whatever happened with that. In 2017, in Salk Institute in California, he again led another experiment to grow an embryo, a human pig embryo. This embryo contains cells from humans and pigs as well. So kind of like a human pig hybrid. And, I was reading about like, why? Why are you even doing this? The goal, well, supposedly the stated goal is to make organs that could be genetically matched and then, reprogram into stem cells. It has to do with stem cell research and organ donation and stuff like that. Okay. Hybridization, which it ties pretty close to cloning and cloning research. So why are we even talking about this, right? Why in a class on Revelation and the study of end times, we're even talking about cloning and hybrids? Well, I keep referencing the Book of Jasher from the Dead Sea Scrolls because in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus warned us about what's coming, one of the verses there is interesting. He says, as it was in the time of Noah, so would it be at the time of the coming of the Son of Man. Then the time of my return will be like it was in the days of Noah. Well, according to the Book of Joshua, during the days of Noah, right before the flood, this stuff was going on, the mixtures of animals of one species with the other. And it said that all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And this is finally led to God decided to wipe the earth clean and basically hit the reset button with the huge flood, which Noah and his family survived. And only the pure animals that were not hybrids survived. So could it be all the animals that did not make it, extinct animals like dinosaurs and, saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that? Were they hybrids? Were they man-made hybrids, as the Book of Jasher claims? How about human-animal hybrids? We got these Greek mythologies or many mythologies of, what do they call it? Like centaurs, like horsemen, or minotaur, the half bull, half man. Could these mythological creatures have actually existed before the flood? According to the Dead Sea Scroll Book of Jasher, where they were mixing species with each other and flesh had corrupted its ways. Maybe. I threw out the question too, if you got these hybrids or clones one day, do they have souls? Were they not written in the book of life before the foundations of the earth? Because they were not meant to exist and they're abominations. Would they be the ones, these hybrids or clones in the future, would they be the ones that are amazed at the reappearance of the beast in Revelation 17. Because it says the people that were not found in the book of life from the foundation of the earth are amazed at the reappearance of the beast. So we got a bunch of clones and hybrids running around in the future, and they resurrect this, who knows, 2,000-year-old, body and clone them. Yeah, I think they'd be pretty amazed. I think everybody would be pretty amazed at that. So, there's been a judgment on the earth before, and this is the stuff that was happening right before the judgment. And now we are getting close to, or not getting close, we're doing it, right? We got ligers, we're making hybrids, we're making human pig and human monkey organs, who knows? There might even be hybrids walking amongst us that we don't even know about. So it's like we're setting ourselves up for another judgment, is what it seems like, which ties in with what the Book of Revelation tells us. Interesting cloning and stem cell research has been a hot topic over the last probably about decade and a half. It's a really hot topic during President Obama's first term. In 2009, he actually had a meeting with Pope Benedict, and they talked about many topics, but one of the topics that was discussed with the Pope was, stem cell research, abortion, cloning, and kind of bioethics in general, that topic, and kind of the Vatican's stance on, bioethics. Pope Benedict didn't really agree with, what was going on during the current times. President Obama was kind of I don't know what exactly his stance was on it, but it seemed like he was kind of pro, in vitro fertilization and cloning and stem cell research and all that stuff. So there was a big moral discussion on just the bioethics of all of that stuff. Now, fast forward a decade and a half now, in vitro fertilization is a full-blown thing now. It's happening. Stem cell research has continued. No evidence of human cloning besides what I shared about those experiments in 2017, but doesn't mean it ain't happening, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens that we aren't privy to or know about, so maybe that stuff is going on. Then we kind of ended talking about President Obama, because his first 2 years in office, there were some interesting things. So we have been talking about numbers, right? And about the number 13 and its association with the cult. Another number associated with that is the number 72. And I mentioned President Obama's interesting statement. Maybe coincidence, maybe it didn't mean this, maybe it didn't, I don't know. But he made, after his first 100 days as president, there was a dinner in May of 2009 where he made a comment that he said his next 100 days will be so successful that he will complete them in 72 days. Now, you could have picked any number between 1 to 100. Why did he pick 72? I don't know. Is it just random? Maybe. Or, is there some significance to it? I know there's a lot of significance to the number 72, which I'll share with you in a minute. But what was also interesting is on that 72nd day, that's the day he met with the Pope to talk about cloning and in vitro fertilization and stem cell research. Here's kind of the calendar to show you. His first 100 days was inauguration January 20th to April 30th. His second 100 days then would be the next day, May 1st to August 7th. So if you start from May 1st and you count 72 days, it lands you on July 10th, which was the day that he met with Pope Benedict and had that bioethics discussion. Coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. I don't really believe in coincidence, but... And then, he mentioned in his speech, right? And then on the 73rd day, I will rest. Everybody laughed about it. Very funny. Well, if you know about Shabbat, if you know about Sabbath and the seventh day of rest, I'm a little insulted by it. It almost seems like a spitting on God's Sabbath, you know. Oh, and on the 73rd day I will rest, kind of like as a joke. Well, it happened to be that he met with the Pope on Friday, the 72nd day, and the 73rd day was a Saturday. It was an actual Sabbath day. So, again, I don't know if he meant something or this is all coincidence, but, you know, this is, as time continues, you got to start looking at this kind of stuff. You got to have an eye to see that when comments are made and speeches are made, be looking for these kind of clues, because as we talked about last week, and, you know, kind of secret society and this whole secrecy thing and deception thing, you know, things have to be mentioned. Things have to be shared. And when you want to share something that you don't want the whole public to know, but you want only a certain audience to know, you know, you embed it with clues. You embed it with numerology. You embed it with numbers. That number 72 is a significant number. It's not some just random number. It was the number of languages spoken at the Tower of Babel after it was scrambled, according to later Jewish tradition. It was the number of generations listed in Genesis chapter 10. Interesting, Nimrod is in that genealogy in Genesis chapter 10. It was the number of disciples Jesus sent forth to preach the gospel, you know, 72. It's the total number of books in the Catholic Bible. Now, I know our Bible has 66, or the Protestant Bible has 66, but there's an Apocrypha section in the Catholic Bible that brings it up to 72. And that is if the Book of Lamentation is considered. So if you go and count it, they kind of combine Jeremiah and Lamentation, so it comes out to 71. But in our Bible, Lamentation, it's its own book. So depending how you count it, it could be 72. In the Muslim religion, is the number of Hori, I think is how you say it, that each Muslim martyr receives in paradise. You know, virgins, they receive 72. Osiris, that guy that we talked about last week, it goes back to him. He was enclosed in a coffin by his 72 evil disciples of Set. You know, Set's 72 guys are the ones who put his body in the coffin. In Islam, 72 is the number of denominations, interesting, that are doomed to hell, according to the Hadith, which is sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, another scroll that's out there, it was said that Solomon actually sealed with his key 72 demons. Okay, let's see, what other religion? Confucius had 72 masters. According to the Egyptian creation myth, the 72nd region day of the year from the moon is a game of draughts. Not exactly sure what that means, but yeah, with Egyptian myth, number 72 is there, which is interesting because Osiris and our Obelisk discussion last week. 72 is the number of immortals in Taoism. The Pentagon, right? 5 sides, 5 angles, each measures 72 degrees. Coincidence? And the Second World War lasted from September 1st, 1939 to September 2nd, 1945. Exactly 72 months. If you want to do more research, I'm going to put that link there so you can see the significance of number 72. So why would President Obama use that number? Was it just coincidence? Maybe. Or was it intentional to use that number 72 in his comment? And then on that day, go and meet with the Pope and talk about bioethics, and then make a joke about resting the next day on the biblical Sabbath. So that statement alone kind of led me to research more about President Obama and his presidency. During his, second 100 days, he visited Egypt. He was very fascinated with Egypt. He got a tour of the pyramids. It's funny, they even named him the new King Tut of the world, which is interesting because in Egyptian mythology, King Tut is known as one that will bring back the Egyptian gods. Okay, coincidence. Um, there was a funny joke too when he was touring those pyramids that I remember. There was kind of like a little hieroglyph inside the, one of the chambers he was touring, and a joke was made that it looked just like Obama. You could see it's like, oh yeah, look, he's got my ears. You can research. Kind of a funny comment President Obama made, but it does look like him actually. So yeah, they made him a whole plaque. You can see it there on the left. Obama, the new Tut of the world, all that. So that was a month prior meeting with the Pope about bioethics. And during that time, back in our country, between 2008 and 2010, there was this road show going on called Tutankhamun and the Golden Age of the Pharaohs. And it was touring around the country. And in association with that tour, you had this huge statue of Anubis, which was also being toured around America. On the left, you see it was taking up the Hudson River on a boat, across the, in front of the Statue of Liberty. We've talked about that statue before too. There's a picture of it on the boat. Huge statue. Ended up in Denver, in the Denver airport next to Blucifer. If you don't know, there's a demonish blue horse statue in the Denver airport with beaming red eyes, called Blucifer, like Lucifer, but blue. Now Anubis, which, remember from last week, he's the one that's supposedly going to bring Osiris back from the underworld back up to life and resurrect him. So, all these things have very alarming coincidences. Denver, of course, that's where President Obama had his inauguration speech, or his victory speech when he won the election. Looking at his stage, it looks a lot like the throne of Satan in Revelation 3 in Pergamum on the top right there. Also like the rendition of it in the Berlin Museum. I don't know, maybe a coincidence, but to me it looks a lot like it. And it's in Denver where Blucifer is and where Anubis ended up. And the speech was by the new King Tut of the world, who will bring back the Egyptian gods, and Anubis will bring back Osiris. So we're talking about resurrection here. We're talking about cloning. How about that body of Gilgamesh that was found in great preservation, mummified? Can we pull DNA and clone that thing? Was that Osiris? Is it Orion? Is it Nimrod? Is it Gilgamesh? Is it all the same guy? Is he the one that we're going to bring back by cloning? It could all be related and it could all not. It could all just be coincidence, right? But, you got to have an eye out for these things. And then he received in just this is amazing, right? In just 2 years of being president, Obama received a Nobel Peace Prize. That is a massive achievement. That thing is not given out easily. There's only been 2 other presidents in our entire history as a nation that has received it. That's Theodore Roosevelt for mediating between Russia and Japan in 1906, and Woodrow Wilson for, founding of the League of Nations, which was a predecessor to the United Nations that we've talked about. President Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize for, the statement is, for his extraordinary efforts to strengthen the international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples. Okay, a lot of people do that. But he got it. But what's also interesting too is he got it, look at the date, December 9, 2009. And the Nobel Peace Prize, he went to pick it up in Norway. Now, for those who live in Norway, they would know that date, December 9, 2009, because there was a weird spiral that appeared in the sky that night. I'll post the link in the comment here so you can look it up. Basically, that night, the same day that President Obama was in Norway picking up the Nobel Peace Prize after only being president for 2 years, that night, this huge spiral appeared in the sky, which kind of looked like a portal. and then it opened up at the end, and this kind of black hole kind of swallowed the whole thing up and it disappeared. So links in the comment if you want to look at the video footage of it. Kind of weird. I don't know what was happening there. So that's kind of where we ended our discussion, and we will be picking it up next week with Maddie's research, is the only one left, about UFOs, the UFO phenomenon and the increase in UFOs in recent years. So looking forward to talk about that and what's going on there. So until then, keep your eye open, keep looking for truth.